everyone. Welcome back to my channel. I am really glad to be home. I enjoyed a refreshing time away celebrating Easter with family, but I'm glad to be back on today, and I hope that you enjoyed a wonderful Easter too. Today I want to talk to you about something called groupthink. It's something we deal with every single day. The term groupthink has been around since the 1970s, actually, and it's basically the process of getting a group to come to some kind of a consensus about something. Sometimes coercion or persuasion is used. Sometimes even abuse is used to get people to agree. At other times, just the awareness that many others are jumping on the bandwagon is enough to cause a great swell of gravitation toward some kind of ideology. Groupthink happens in families, it happens in the workplace, in churches, communities, and even within intimate circles of friends. Sometimes groupthink can be a positive thing and turns out really well. For example, if a group of people want to hike a mountain, and some people have an interest in it, but they just don't have enough confidence to do it, the group will encourage the ones that are hesitant to join them. They'll tell them, we have safety measures that we're taking, and I'll be with you, or whatever, something to instill confidence. And then hopefully at the end of the day, the group has conquered the mountain and everybody feels a sense of accomplishment. But oftentimes people get caught up in groupthink and they'll abandon their own convictions because of fear, a fear of being left out, of being rejected by a group, or being viewed as an outsider. They just can't help but choose to join what is popular. And we all know what happens to people who take a stand against the flow. We see that regularly in our culture. When you look at history, there are examples of groupthink all over the place. And there are also examples of people who refuse to go along with groupthink. We look at one example, the incident in Guyana in 1978, known as Jonestown, where 900 people, in accordance with their leader's wishes, drank a beverage in a show of unity that killed them. And a third of them were children and adolescents. Within this tragedy, we see the gradual progression of a harmful groupthink. When this group, known as the People's Temple, began in 1950 as a church, they were a community devoted to benevolence and outreach, welcoming to all races. But within 10 to 15 years, something started changing. And by the 1970s, the group began to take on signs of an unhealthy philosophy of control. Later on, they moved to the country of Guyana. And at this time, officials in America began to do an investigation on them because they were hearing reports of forced captivity and abuse of the people who were there on the compound. Rather than risk being rescued, because there was a rescue attempt that was in place, the members of the group were so deceived that they believed that suicide was their best option. Hence the term was born, drinking the Kool-Aid, which is now a common phrase we use all the time to describe people who are deceived. When we look at people like Corrie ten Boom or Oskar Schindler, we see people who stood against groupthink of their era. There was a huge price to be paid for the stand that they took against oppression. They did not opt for the safety of groupthink. With the power of social media, today's culture is saturated with groupthink, and it's hard to discern our way in this bombardment of voices that we deal with every day. When we hear something over and over, we become aware that people are adopting a certain viewpoint. And then we hear about politicians, celebrities, people start speaking out about their viewpoint, and pretty soon you feel this pressure to go that direction. We feel very drawn there. In many cases, people will set aside their own personal beliefs or adopt the opinion of the rest of the group, even when they don't agree. You may have a sense that your view is not popular and that it will cost you something if you don't go along with the group. Rich and I have been rereading the book of Revelation as a part of a Zoom Bible study that we're currently in. As we're now in the heart of this final book in the Bible, we are seeing in chapter 13 the power of something called groupthink. In this chapter in Revelation, much of the world will be drawn to someone who is quite able to mimic God in powerful ways. They will have a religious quality about them, and the person will fool many people, and they will be drawn to accept something called the mark of the beast. We wonder, how could people worldwide be drawn into a system like this? Even many who claim to be Christ followers will decide, we have no choice, we have to do this. The answer is that they're going to look at this situation and feel like, this is pretty logical. And they'll have reasons for doing it. They'll also be swept up in the popularity of it all. They also might be afraid to divert from what they see happening around them and just go along with it. The stakes in this case will be very high, and those who do not conform to the mark of the beast will suffer temporarily. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not conform to the patterns of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." This past year, as world events have unfolded, we've all formed opinions based on what we've heard in the media. But the truth is much harder to come by. Masks, social distancing, vaccines, the political scene, racial unrest. Some of the opinions we've formed were because we were influenced by the opinions of people around us. Maybe continuing in your job depended on you identifying with a certain ideology, or maybe it was about keeping peace in the family. These are examples of groupthink at work. Dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. 1 John 4:1. I'd like to close with a story. It was a summer day in the 50s. A teacher's role that day was to give a story from the Bible to a small group of young children who had come to listen. She picked a story that was rather obscure, not really typical of a Bible story given to children. That day she taught them on Ezekiel 28, the fall from heaven of an angel named Lucifer, who we refer to as Satan. This event happened at some point before Adam and Eve were created, when Satan took on the form of a serpent in the Garden of Eden. The teacher used two images as she briefly told the story to the children. She had two figures of thrones that would be found in a king's court. The thrones were the same size and shape. They were both very beautiful and were quite different when it came to their color. One throne was a sparkling white. It glistened like snow does in sunlight. This throne represented Almighty God. The other throne was brightly colored with beautiful jewel tones of red, sapphire, emerald green, and gold. This throne was Lucifer's. The teacher explained the events that took place in heaven when Lucifer was found to have an evil heart as he attempted to set himself up as one greater than God and enlist other angels to join him in his cause. He and the angel buddies of his, who he recruited, were cast out of heaven. Then the teacher said to the children, as she showed them the throne belonging to God and the one belonging to Lucifer, everyone will need to make a decision as to who they will worship and follow. Who will you follow? As a 6-year-old girl studying these images and contemplating my future, I knew who I was going to follow. It was the day I made a commitment to follow Christ. But I had to admit that Lucifer's throne was stunning, absolutely stunning. I didn't base my decision, though, on the appearance of the throne. I based it on who God is and what he had already done for me by giving his life. I find it interesting that I remember those 10 to 12 minutes with such clarity, more so than any other event in my early childhood. I can recall every thought that went through my head when making that decision. And still today, I'm very aware of what it cost God to love me enough to give his life for me. So many times we go the way we want to go and we ask God to follow us. In these days, God is asking us to keep our eyes on him and follow him. So I'd like to ask you, how is groupthink impacting your relationship with God? What are you hearing in your environment, and how does it influence you? What does God say? Who determines your destiny and guides you as you make your daily decisions?